I was getting ready for my boyfriend's and my anniversary when he suddenly texted that he needed time to work on himself. I sighed. He was the third boyfriend in a year to break up with me on our 3-month anniversary. My roommate found me sitting on my bed, vaping. Let me guess. Jack just ended it? She asked. I nodded, showing her my phone. Blocked on Instagram, WhatsApp, everything. Maybe you're cursed, she joked. But I didn't laugh. When I told my dad, he seemed oddly relieved, just as he had with the others. When I started dating Igor, my fourth boyfriend, I documented everything we did. I forced myself to act distant and let him chase me. Yet on our 3-month mark, it happened again. I need to work on myself. Blocked everywhere. He transferred schools the next week. For boyfriend number 5, I went to extremes. Dyed my hair blonde, bought a new wardrobe and changed my makeup style, wondering if I was unattractive. At our 3-month picnic, he looked down at his phone, went pale, and recited, I need to work on myself. You're not the one for me. By Monday, his friends were crossing the street to avoid me. One muttered something about not wanting trouble. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. A year later, when I felt ready to date again, I decided not to sleep with the next boyfriend or introduce him to anyone. I tried the mysterious girl approach and kept everything surface level. 3 months in, he sent the text while we were supposed to be at the movies. I need to work on myself. Sorry. Gone from campus within 3 days. When I cried to my mom, she just patted my shoulder and said, the right one will come along. At 26 on a date with boyfriend number 9, I saw Connor, my very first boyfriend, walk in. His face drained of color when he saw me with Merrick. He slowly walked over. I really did love you, he said quietly. Then why did you leave? I asked. The question I'd held in for years. It wasn't me, your dad, he began, then stopped, went pale, and practically ran out. Merrick asked who that was. I shrugged, not wanting him to think I was stuck on the past. After Merrick broke up with me, I went deeper. I got a therapist and asked if I had daddy issues. She assured me I was healthy. When I met Ash, I didn't even want to date him at first, but he was persistent and kind, always showing up where I'd be, somehow knowing my schedule. On our 3-month anniversary, when he glanced at his phone, I braced for the usual script. Let me guess, you need to work on yourself? Hey, he interrupted, showing me a funny video of a dog purring like a cat. I breathed a sigh of relief. Month 4 passed, then 5. My parents asked about him more than they ever had with anyone. By month 6, I felt safe enough to send his photo to the family group chat. Everyone was thrilled. My dad wrote, glad you finally came to your senses. The next week was Dad's birthday. Immediate family only. They insisted I bring Ash. Halfway through dinner, Mom tried to embarrass me with old baby photos. That's when I noticed something. In every photo, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, there was the same little boy next to me. Oh my gosh, I laughed. He looks exactly like Ash. That's weird. Dad smiled strangely. Well, it makes sense, Mom said. That's the boy we've wanted you with all along. Finally, the plan worked. The room went cold. What plan? I asked, my voice shaking. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I planned this relationship with Uncle Aman and Aunt Priya when you were babies. My stomach dropped. Uncle Aman? Why would Uncle Aman care who I date? Dad flipped to a page labeled Future Couple in gold letters. Dozens of photos of me and that boy at every holiday and family vacation. That's Ash, I whispered. Of course, Dad said simply. Aman and Ania's son, your cousin. The room spun. You two have been promised since birth. It's important to keep the business in the family, just like our parents did. I looked at Ash. He sat there, calm. I've known for about a month, he admitted. We're barely related, and it's legal here. I'd already fallen for you. Dad nodded, like this was normal. Your mother and I are second cousins too. It's how we protect the family business. I smiled, not because I wasn't disgusted, but because I had an ace up my sleeve. I kept my smile steady while Dad spoke about family traditions and Mom served dessert. My phone was recording everything from my pocket. I asked Dad how long they'd been planning this, sounding curious, like I wanted family history. He pulled out more albums, photos from before I was born. He and Uncle Amen shaking hands over business deals, promising their future kids would marry. Mom chimed in about how they chose my name to match Ash's. I leaned closer so my phone caught every word. Ash ate cake like it was normal, occasionally adding details about how his parents had shown him the same albums when he turned 25. I asked more questions, pretending to warm up to the idea, and got them to explain how they'd driven off my other boyfriends. Dad laughed about the money he'd paid them, calling it small investments to protect the plan. When dinner ended and Ash drove me home, I stayed quiet, planning my next moves. That night, I built a timeline of every boyfriend, old texts, emails, and my dad's call logs. Each breakup lined up with calls to unknown numbers. I saw patterns in my old Instagram posts, where Dad commented days before breakups. The timeline looked like a movie conspiracy board. Dates, strings of connections. I saved everything to multiple cloud accounts and USB drives hidden around my apartment. I searched Connor online, found him working at a marketing firm, promoted twice, but looking tired in his photo. I sent him a message. I'd learned why we broke up and wanted to talk. He read it quickly but replied 3 hours later with just an address and time. I reviewed my journals. Dad had always asked specific questions before each breakup: restaurants, movies. Mom's relief when things ended showed up in sketches I'd drawn. My journal from Igor's time had an entry about Dad randomly appearing at our study spot. The one from Boyfriend 5 mentioned Mom running into us at the mall 3 times in a week. I photographed every page. I scrolled through Ash's social media. He'd been liking my posts since college, even commenting on my graduation photo. "Can't wait to celebrate with you someday." His own posts rarely mentioned other girls, but shared every business update involving our families. I called my therapist's emergency line and brought her a folder of documentation. She read through everything, her expression hardening. She said this level of coordination suggested serious control issues and possible criminal harassment, then handed me a business card for an attorney named Deborah, who specialized in family harassment cases. She warned me to document everything. I set up automatic backups for my recordings, turned on location tracking, and created a separate email for evidence. That weekend, while my parents were at their golf club, I used a spare key to photograph every page of the album labeled Future Couple. Notes about keeping the bloodline pure, family trees showing cousin marriages, timelines of when Ash and I were supposed to meet, marry, and have kids. More albums of family vacations where we'd been posed like a couple since toddlers. Monday, I tested Ash. Over breakfast, I casually mentioned a job offer in another city. His mug froze mid-air, and he immediately said Dad wouldn't approve, then tried to cover by saying, "We wouldn't want to leave." Minutes later, Dad called asking about my job plans. Proof they were coordinating. I told Ash I was going to the gym after work but went to the library instead. 20 minutes later, Ash texted asking why I wasn't at the gym, pretending he'd wanted to surprise me. There was no way he could know unless someone was tracking me. I screenshotted his message with timestamps and my actual location. 20 minutes after that, Ash walked into the library pretending surprise. I took a photo of us together with the timestamp. I texted Connor to meet somewhere public. 3 days later at a downtown coffee shop, I arrived early and set my phone to record. Connor walked in looking exhausted, hands shaking. He told me Dad had shown up at his office the day after we broke up, smiling that cold smile, hinting at contracts and partnerships without direct threats. He showed me text from a blocked number referencing his parents' mortgage application at a bank Dad had connections with. The messages were vague enough to avoid illegality, but clear enough to terrify. He'd transferred schools within a week to protect his family. The next week, my therapist said this went beyond family pressure into stalking and harassment, and called Deborah Roberts immediately. Deborah specialized in cases where families used money and power to control their children. At her downtown office, she spread out my evidence, and explained stalking laws, harassment definitions, and conspiracy charges. She showed me examples of restraining orders and warned about defamation risks if we went public without solid proof. She said we needed more evidence, tracking data, documented coordination, and witnesses. That night, I called Bridger from college. He'd always been good with tech, and asked him to check my devices. He found 3 hidden tracking apps on my phone, keyloggers on my laptop, and a GPS tracker under my car. Professional-grade equipment worth thousands. He documented everything with screenshots and photos. He was going through my Google settings when he froze and turned the screen to me. My calendar had been shared with an unfamiliar email address. The domain matched my dad's company, but the account used a generic name to hide it. Bridger checked the sharing history. It went back 6 years. Every appointment, class, and date I'd entered was visible to whoever owned that account. The log showed hundreds of accesses, almost always immediately before Ash would coincidentally appear somewhere. The pattern made me feel sick. That weekend I went to my parents for dinner and tried to bring up privacy casually. New phone number, being more careful online. Mom laughed it off, waved her spatula, and said privacy was a modern affectation that broke up families. In our generation, she said, everyone knew everyone's business. It kept people safe. Her words sounded memorized. When I pressed, she got defensive. This was how their family had always run things. Ash invited me to uncle and aunts the next day. I accepted, charged my phone, and tested the recording app twice before we left. Their house was bigger than I remembered. The table set like a formal event. Uncle kept refilling my wine and lecturing about bloodlines, family obligations, and the need to keep money and power concentrated. Aunt added that they'd already chosen baby names and schools. They spoke about my life as if it were a plan they'd written. When we'd marry, when I'd stop working, when we'd take over parts of the business. They sounded oblivious to how disturbing it was. A campus advisor agreed to meet me at a nearby Starbucks. She was visibly nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. She couldn't speak on the record, but hinted that donor families sometimes influence student transfers, and that paperwork could be expedited when large donations were involved. She pointed out my father's name on several campus buildings and implied the pattern was not new. That night, I woke to emails from friends of my ex's saying they'd noticed odd things and wanted to help. The next morning, Connor texted, "Check your email." Attached were 3 screenshots. A Zelle payment for $8,000 from Meridian Holdings LLC, dated the day after our breakup. His student loan statement showing he owed $8,001 that month, and a note of apology repeated over and over. I forwarded the screenshots to Bridger, who was already digging into Dad's business ties. Within hours, he'd found Meridian Holdings in the state business registry. The registered agent was the same law firm Dad used. On the firm's site, Dad's smiling photo appeared on the partners page as a major client. Bridger traced 5 more similarly named LLCs, all filed through the same law firm and created within days of different breakups. I photographed the records while he saved copies to multiple clouds. To test how deep this went, I texted Ash that I was meeting a fake coworker named Jaden at a coffee shop near the park. I sat there recording. 3 minutes after I sent the text, my parents walked in, acting surprised. Mom sat with me and made small talk, while Dad positioned himself to watch the door. They lingered 45 minutes, nursing the same drinks, and I could see Dad texting as I left. On Monday, a receptionist brought a delivery to my desk. Ash standing with a huge bouquet. He told me Dad was worried I wasn't answering his calls. Odd, since I hadn't told anyone I'd been ignoring them. I thanked him coolly and documented the encounter. After work, I took my documentation to Deborah. She spread the printouts across her conference table and explained legal options. We had enough for a harassment restraining order, but going public risked expensive defamation suits. Even when the facts were true, we needed an airtight case with witnesses and detailed evidence before filing. Connor agreed to meet Deborah and sign a notarized statement about Dad's behavior, but insisted his name stay confidential. He feared repercussions at work. While in Deborah's waiting room, I got a Facebook message from someone connected to boyfriend number 5. He'd seen I was asked questions and sent screenshots of a group chat from right after that breakup. People had circulated rumors that I was unstable and dangerous, claiming I'd threatened my ex and his family. The account spreading the rumors was fake, but the messages included private details only someone close to my family would know. That night I pulled my credit report. It was worse than I expected. 3 credit cards opened when I was 16, 2 store cards at 18, and a line of credit at 21, all showing my parents as authorized users with full access. Addresses I'd never lived at and thousands in charges I'd never made. The pattern went back over a decade. They'd maintained financial control through accounts I didn't know existed. 2 days later, Mom arrived at my apartment unannounced with homemade food and a gift bag. Inside was a silver bracelet I recognized from old photos. Been in the family for generations, she said, and she clasped it on my wrist before I could protest, talking about tradition and how proud she was that I was now accepting my role. I smiled and cataloged the visit in my evidence file. I met Ursula, an investigative journalist, at a diner. She listened, reviewed my documents, and said she was interested but would need more sources on the record. She advised reaching out to more exes for corroboration. Then Ash sent a photo of himself outside a coffee shop with the caption, "Where are you, babe?" I'd never told him I'd been planning to go there. I screenshotted it and added it to the file, proof he was getting my location from somewhere else, likely my calendar access. I called Deborah. She told me to come in that afternoon to start restraining order paperwork. Her assistant copied everything while we reviewed it. Screenshots, recordings, witness statements from Connor, my roommate, and the frightened friend of boyfriend number 5. My roommate had already been keeping notes, dates and times. Ash showed up uninvited and promised to testify. Bridger came over with his laptop to check devices. Within 20 minutes, he found an old iPad logged into my parents' Apple family account, actively syncing my iCloud. That meant they could see my calendar, contacts, and photos. He documented the sync history, showing it had been ongoing for years. The iPad's location was at my parents' house. On that iPad, we found a shared calendar titled Future Couple Planning, color-coded and full of entries dating back to my college years. Reminders like introduce Ash at farmer's market, arranged Connor breakup week 12, and Eagle transfer paperwork deadline. My dating life was laid out with timelines, notes, and success metrics. A business plan for courting me. I photographed the calendar with Bridger's phone since mine was Karma's. I called Dad. He initially tried to frame it as parental concern, calm and dismissive. When I mentioned legal action, he went cold, reminding me I was on their insurance, their phone plan, and that they'd co-signed my lease. Family takes care of family, he said, then hung up. Deborah instructed me to keep all communication in writing from then on. No calls, no in-person meetings unless recorded, to avoid anything being twisted against me. Ursula lined up an off-the-record meeting with a former university administrator, who confirmed that donor families had influenced student transfers and removals in the past. No names, but a clear pattern tied to donation timing and transfer paperwork. 2 days later, Ash pressed to meet and clear things up. Deborah advised I bring a witness and record. At the coffee shop, I stayed calm, asked point blank how he'd known where to run into me. He admitted Dad had told him my schedule and suggested times to show up, but insisted he'd fallen for me despite the arrangement, and that meant it was okay. His insistence that love excused months of surveillance made it clear how deeply the family mindset ran. When I got home, my phone buzzed with repeated calls from Mom. On the 5th call, I answered and recorded her. She sobbed about how going public would destroy the family business and reputation, begging me to handle it privately. Her pleas were about legacy and partners, not remorse. I forwarded the recording to Deborah. An hour later, Connor sent another screenshot. A Zelle payment from the same LLC, labeled Appreciation for Discretion, this time for $10,000, dated the week after their breakup. The account number matched the checks I'd seen tied to Dad's business. I sent it to Deborah, who called it the smoking gun. Bridger found the LLC's registered agent, the same law firm handling Dad's companies, and sent state filing screenshots proving the connection. I organized everything into a massive folder for Deborah: screenshots, transcripts, witness statement. The stack was nearly 2 inches thick when I carried it to her office. She helped complete the supplemental filing forms. 3 days later, a courier delivered an envelope from Hartley Brennan and Associates, Dad's law firm. Inside was a cease and desist, alleging harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, threatening legal action unless I retracted any statements I'd made about the family's private matters. Deborah laughed when I forwarded the cease and desist. She called it a classic intimidation move that actually showed they were worried. If they truly believed they could win, she said, they'd have filed suit instead of threatening it. She spent 2 days drafting a firm reply that refused their demands and outlined possible criminal charges: stalking, harassment, conspiracy, privacy violations, while citing anti-SLAPP protections that could make them pay my legal fees if they tried to use litigation to silence me. The letter was precise and controlled, warning them to back off and making clear we had enough evidence to act if they pushed it. 4 days after Deborah sent that response, my debit card was declined at the grocery store. My bank showed the joint account my paychecks had gone into since I was 18 had been frozen by my parents. There was $8,000 in it I couldn't access, and rent due in 5 days. My roommate found me on the kitchen floor, eating cereal from the box, and immediately offered to cover my share without hesitation. I picked up 3 extra freelance projects that week, and worked until my eyes burned to pay her back and cover the next month. The financial squeeze made everything harder. Ursula, the journalist, called excited a few days later. She'd found a second university administrator willing to go on the record about donor families influencing student transfers. This person produced dates, donation amounts, and emails about handling transfers diplomatically, enough verification that even aggressive lawyers would struggle to call the story fabricated. Meanwhile, Ash kept sending long messages, mixing apologies and justifications. He framed it as family tradition, said arranged marriages weren't unusual in some cultures, and insisted he loved me despite how it started. Each message was more urgent than the last. Destiny, fate, that the family had only helped what would have happened anyway. I didn't reply. I screenshot every text and sent them to Deborah, saving multiple backups in case my phone was compromised. Deborah called to prepare for the restraining order hearing. I spent a day at her office reviewing evidence while she played the opposing counsel, drilling me on dates and details until I could answer calmly without getting flustered. We organized screenshots into labeled folders and printed 3 copies of everything. One for us, one for the judge, one for Ash's legal team. She coached me on posture, where to look, how to speak into the microphone, and how to stay composed if they tried to portray me as vindictive. By midnight I was exhausted, but felt ready. The hearing was Thursday morning. I barely slept. I arrived an hour early and practiced breathing in my car. Inside, Ash sat with 2 expensive-looking lawyers, avoiding eye contact. The judge was an older woman, sharp and efficient. Deborah squeezed my shoulder as we started. I swore in, and for nearly an hour I walked the court through the synchronized calendars Bridger had found and the tracking evidence, how Ash always knew where I was, even when I lied about my location. Ash's lawyer objected repeatedly, calling the evidence circumstantial and framing it as normal family concern. He used the phrase close-knit family dynamics more than once to suggest care rather than stalking. He also pointed to social media location tags. But Deborah had prepared me. I explained instances where I hadn't posted and Ash still appeared, like the time I spontaneously studied at an unfamiliar coffee shop. The judge asked pointed questions about the shared calendar labeled future couple planning, and reviewed Connor's notarized statement about Dad paying him to disappear. She examined bank records showing LLC payments to my exes and asked Ash's lawyers to explain how that fit normal behavior. They offered no documentation of services rendered. After 3 hours of testimony and argument, the judge took a recess to review the record. Those 20 minutes felt endless. When court resumed, She granted a limited restraining order. Ash must stay 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. It wasn't the absolute no-contact order we'd sought, but it provided legally enforceable protection. Outside the courthouse, Dad waited on the steps, far enough not to break the order, close enough I couldn't avoid him. His face was controlled, his jaw clenched. He spoke in a low, measured voice about how disappointed he was and how I was destroying everything our grandparents built. He reminded me of conditions on my trust fund, company bylaws about conduct, and implied it would be hard to make it on my own. I recorded the conversation on my phone, capturing his veiled warnings. That afternoon, Deborah helped draft a formal demand letter to Dad. Stop interfering in my life, notify exes that any agreements or threats were nullified, and cover therapy and legal costs I'd incurred because of their manipulation. The letter threatened criminal action for stalking and conspiracy if he refused. 2 days later, Dad's lawyer sent a settlement offer that stunned me. A mid-six-figure sum that would secure my future financially, but only if I signed an NDA, agreed never to discuss the family publicly, and accepted language denying any admission of wrongdoing. The money was tempting given my strained finances, but signing would let them continue the pattern unchecked. I spent long therapy sessions that week, grieving the family I thought I had, and processing that their love had always had conditions. Ursula worked with editors and legal counsel to shape the article, redacting identifiers to avoid defamation, while keeping the core story persuasive. She interviewed experts on coercive control and family abuse for context. We set a publication date 2 weeks out so I could prepare for backlash. I warned my roommate, my employer, and the few friends I trusted. When the article went live, I turned my phone off and went to a movie. 3 hours later, I turned it back on to over 200 messages, missed calls, and social media notifications. Locals recognized the family business name despite careful redactions. Some responses were supportive, people sharing similar experiences and thanking me, while others condemned me for airing dirty laundry. Relatives contacted me with their own stories. Some condemned me, others quietly praised what I'd done. Dad's business partners started asking questions, and the local business journal framed the story as an ethics issue for family enterprises. Within weeks, several of Dad's major clients began exploring other options. 2 weeks passed before any response from Ash or his parents. Their lawyer sent a formal apology letter that admitted nothing but expressed regret over misunderstandings. Ash kept his distance. His parents' flowers to my office went straight into the trash. Dad's company released a vague statement about respecting family privacy. The local press followed up anyway. One of Dad's clients called me to say they could no longer work with someone who treated family that way. I spent the next month applying for jobs with no ties to my family's network. Interviews were awkward. Everyone asked why I'd left my prior role, but finally a small marketing firm hired me for less pay than before. The owner didn't know my last name or family history, and that anonymity was worth the pay cut. My first day felt like a fresh start. Connor messaged to apologize for not fighting harder years ago. I replied accepting his apology and wished him well. That felt like a clean close. Mom asked to meet once more at a neighborhood cafe near the courthouse. She looked older, worn. She explained how scared she'd been of losing the business, how her parents had done the same to her, and how she thought it was just how things worked. She didn't say "I'm sorry" exactly, only that she wished things had been different. We hugged and left, knowing we likely wouldn't have coffee again. I found a small studio on the other side of town, tiny, under 500 square feet, but fully mine, paid from my new salary. When I moved in, I tucked the silver bracelet my mother had given me into the back of a drawer, not ready to throw it away, but not wanting to see it either. My final therapy session was mostly me, describing everything while my therapist listened. She asked what my real ace had been. I realized it wasn't revenge, it was documentation. I'd created an undeniable record that protected me and could help others. Truth was the tool they couldn't buy off. That night I posted a brief update on my private Instagram for close friends. I was safe, free from manipulation, and taking a long break from dating to rediscover who I was. Hitting post felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years, finally allowed to exist without strings pulling behind the scenes. That's where we'll leave it for today. Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate being able to share this. If you want more, hit subscribe and come back.